Picture a young American sailor. He is standing on the deck of his ship, somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, near the end of World War II. He is tired. He just wants to go home. Then someone screams and points at the sky. A single enemy plane is coming toward the ship, but it is not dropping a bomb. It is not turning away. It is flying straight at them, faster and faster, aimed right at the deck. The sailors fire everything they have. They hit the plane. It catches fire. And it still keeps coming. Because the pilot inside does not plan to live. His plane is the bomb, and he wants to take the ship, and everyone on it, down with him. The Americans had a name for these attacks. They called them Kamikaze. Between 1944 and 1945, thousands of young Japanese pilots did this on purpose. But why? Why would a country ask its own young men to kill themselves like this? And what was it like for the U.S. Navy sailors who had to face them? This is the story of the Kamikaze. First, where does that strange word come from? Kamikaze. To find out, we go back almost 700 years, long before this war. In the 1200s, the biggest empire in the world was the Mongol Empire. Twice, once in 1274 and again in 1281, the Mongol leader Kublai Khan sent huge fleets of ships to invade Japan. The Japanese were badly outnumbered. It looked like they would lose. But both times, a giant storm, a typhoon, blew in from the sea. The storm smashed the Mongol ships and sank them. The invasion failed. Japan was saved not by its army, but by the weather. The Japanese believed the gods had sent that storm to protect them. They called it Kamikaze, the divine wind. For hundreds of years, it stood for one simple idea. If Japan was ever about to be destroyed, a power from heaven would come and save it. Almost 700 years later, near the end of World War II, Japan's leaders used that word again. But this time, the divine wind would not be a storm. It would be their own young men. By 1944, Japan was losing the war, and it was losing badly. Back in 1941, Japan had attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor. Japan hoped for a short, fast war. For a while, it worked. Japan took over a big part of the Pacific, but then America woke up, and America was huge. Here's the key thing. American factories could build ships and planes much faster than Japan ever could. For every one aircraft carrier Japan could build, America could build many. Little by little, the U.S. Navy grew into a giant force, and it started pushing Japan back, island by island. By the summer of 1944, Japan's Air Force was in deep trouble. In one big air battle, American pilots shot down hundreds of Japanese planes in a single day. It was so one-sided that the Americans nicknamed it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Japan's best pilots were already dead. The new ones were young and barely trained. So Japan's leaders did some cold math. A young, half-trained pilot in an old plane had almost no chance of hitting an American ship the normal way and getting home alive. He would just get shot down for nothing. But what if he did not try to come home? What if the plane itself was the weapon? One pilot, one plane, one ship. If he crashed straight into the target, even a weak pilot could do real damage. To leaders who were running out of options, this terrible idea started to look like their only answer. In October 1944, this became Japan's official plan. The man behind it was a Japanese admiral named Takejiro Onishi. As American forces closed in, he told his pilots the hard truth. Japan was too weak now to fight the normal way. The only way left, he said, was for pilots to give up their lives, to crash their planes, loaded with bombs, right into American carriers. These pilots were given an official name, the Special Attack Units. But everyone remembered them by that older, holy word, Kamikaze. The first big attacks came at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, near the Philippines. On October 25, 1944, a young Japanese lieutenant named Yukio Seki led the first official kamikaze mission. By most accounts, Seki was not a wild fanatic. He was newly married. He said he was doing it for his country, not out of blind faith. But he flew anyway. That day, the kamikaze got their first big kill, and it was an American ship. A U.S. Navy escort carrier, the USS St. Lo, was hit by a diving plane. It blew up and sank. For the American sailors who saw it, this was a shocking new kind of war. You could shoot a plane, you could set it on fire, and it would still come because the man inside wanted to die. Nothing scared sailors more than an enemy who was not trying to survive. So who were these pilots, really? Here the truth is different from what most people think. We picture crazy fanatics. But many kamikaze were normal young men, college students, 18, 19, 20 years old, pulled out of school as Japan grew desperate for pilots. They had studied books, science, law. Then they were handed a one-way mission. Why did they agree to it? The honest answer is, for many reasons at once. Part of it was their culture. Japanese soldiers were taught that honor was worth more than life. They were taught that giving up was the worst shame of all, and that dying for the emperor was the greatest thing a man could do. Part of it was propaganda. The government told them again and again that these missions were beautiful and holy. But part of it was pressure. When officers asked for volunteers, saying no was almost impossible. If you refused, you shamed yourself, your family, and your whole unit. Some pilots wrote in their diaries that they did not really want to die. They had mothers, they had dreams, but they felt they had no way out. Before their last flights, many of them wrote goodbye letters to their families. Some left behind bits of their hair or fingernails so their parents would have something to bury. When you read those letters today, they break your heart. They are not the words of monsters. They are the words of scared, thoughtful young men saying goodbye to the people they loved. That is the part we must never forget. Behind that scary word, kamikaze, were thousands of real boys, each with a name, a family, and a life that was thrown away. For the U.S. Navy, the worst was still coming. It came in the spring of 1945, at the Battle of Okinawa. Okinawa was the last big island before Japan itself. Both sides knew it. So Japan threw everything it had at the American fleet. It launched giant waves of kamikaze attacks. Instead of one or two planes, now hundreds came at once, trying to swamp the American ships with sheer numbers. Japan even built a special weapon just for this. A small, rocket-powered flying bomb with a pilot inside, carried under a bigger plane, and then dropped to dive at high speed into a ship. It was almost impossible to stop. American sailors gave it a bitter nickname, the Baka bomb. Baka is the Japanese word for fool. The small American destroyers had the hardest job of all. They were placed far out ahead of the fleet on radar picket duty to spot the planes early and warn the others. That also made them the first target. One of them, the USS Laffey, was hit again and again in a single morning, struck by kamikaze, set on fire, torn apart, and yet she refused to sink. Her crew fought so hard that she earned a nickname, the ship that would not die. Even the big carriers were not safe. The USS Bunker Hill was hit by 2 kamikaze in just seconds. Hundreds of her crew were killed in minutes. For weeks, American sailors barely slept. They watched the sky all day and all night, knowing that at any moment a man might come screaming down out of the clouds to kill them by killing himself. So here is the big question. All those attacks, all those young lives, did it actually work? For the U.S. Navy, the kamikaze were deadly and terrifying. Over the war, they sank dozens of American and Allied ships and damaged hundreds more. They killed thousands of sailors. In pure fear, they were one of the worst weapons America faced in the whole Pacific. But it was not enough to change who won. And there are 2 big reasons why. First, America simply had too many ships. Even these painful losses could be replaced. Second, the U.S. Navy learned fast and fought back smart. They put rings of destroyers far out to catch the planes early. They kept fighter planes in the air all the time to shoot the kamikaze down before they reached the fleet. They even built special anti-aircraft shells that blew up near a plane without needing a direct hit. Because of this,
Most kamikaze never reached their target at all. The great majority were shot down before they could dive. Thousands of young men flew out to die and changed almost nothing. That is the sad heart of this story. The kamikaze were not some clever plan that could win the war. They were what a country does when it has lost all hope and starts spending its own children instead. In August 1945, after atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan gave up. The divine wind never came. There was no magic storm this time, only ruin. The day after Japan surrendered, Admiral Onishi, the man who had helped start the kamikaze, took his own life. He left a note saying sorry. Sorry to the thousands of young pilots he had sent to die, and sorry to their families. In the end, he chose to share their fate.
By the time it was over, about 4,000 kamikaze pilots had died. 4,000 goodbye letters. 4,000 families waiting for sons who never came home. And on the other side, thousands of American sailors were dead too. Young men with their own families killed on the decks of their ships far from home. This one weapon burned up the youth of both countries at the same time. So how should we remember the kamikaze? Not as heroes, because calling it heroic hides how wrong it is to ask children to die. But not as monsters either, because most of them were victims too, trapped in a system that cared more about their deaths than their lives. Maybe the best way to honor them is just to see them clearly, to remember that behind the legend of the divine wind were real, scared, human boys, and to make sure that no country ever again turns its young people into weapons. Because the real divine wind was never a storm or a plane or a bomb. It was all the lives that were thrown away, pretending it could save them.